Sony's PlayStation 2 is the best-selling video game console of all time, with over 155 million units sold worldwide and a library containing some of the best games ever. This console helps shape the gaming landscape, and it holds a special place in the hearts of many out there. Unfortunately for Sony, it was mostly downhill from there, and even today Sony seems to be grasping at straws with some of the most horrendous non-consumer friendly practices ever seen by a gaming company in a greedy effort to maximize profits. Now let me be clear, I was always a Sony fan growing up. When the Xbox 360 was dominating that generation of gaming, I opted to hold out for a PlayStation 3 with the hopes that it would be the better console. Though, the 7th generation of gaming can be seen as the real beginning of the turning point for Sony, where they started showing their true colors as a company and prioritizing quick cash over anything else. After what may have been the biggest technological leap in gaming history, that is, the jump to PS2, Xbox, and GameCube from the previous generation, consumers were unsure about what could possibly be next for gaming. At the time, those 6th generation consoles had some of the most incredible, eye-catching graphics we'd ever seen. And while the overall game library was much stronger on the PS2 and GameCube, Microsoft's Xbox was praised as the most powerful of the three, leading speculators to believe that Xbox was the future. Unfortunately for both Sony and Nintendo, these speculations seemed to be correct, as Microsoft was able to push out their 7th generation console, the Xbox 360, in November of 2005, one whole year before we would see the sequel to the PlayStation 2 or GameCube. Now, this release was not all smooth sailing. Microsoft faced many significant issues, including the famous Red Ring of Death. Though how they handled that issue, by fixing or replacing all Red Ring 360s with no questions asked, somewhat redeemed their reputation to the public. In its first year, the Xbox 360 showed us the potential of next-gen gaming, with some of the most realistic high-definition graphics we'd ever seen at that point, an online service that featured things like a friends list and party chat, and a detachable hard drive providing consumers with many different storage options. This console had Sony and Nintendo sweating, trying to get their new consoles out to the public as soon as possible. It was during this era of gaming that Nintendo really decided to take a different approach. Instead of battling Microsoft head-on, they knew it made more sense to do their own thing and focused on providing family-friendly, high-quality games using a lot of unique features, rather than just trying to make the most powerful console possible. This approach can be seen with every Nintendo console from the Wii onwards, and it was clearly the right decision for the company. Sony, on the other hand, decided to face Microsoft head-on, thus sparking the console wars that we still see today. At E3 2005, Sony unveiled the PlayStation 3, and some of its biggest features including utilization of Blu-ray discs and some major titles in development. However, E3 2006 is where the company's true colors began to show. Between E3 2005 and 2006, the Xbox 360 hit the shelves and sold millions of units. After witnessing the issues with the 360's Red Ring of Death, Sony decided to take advantage of this, and at E3 2006, Sony smugly announced the starting retail price of the PlayStation 3, $499 US, a staggering $200 more than the starting price of the Xbox 360. Some of their biggest selling points at this press conference were backwards compatibility with the previous 2 generations of consoles and a completely free online service. They used these points to help justify that outrageously high price tag, as the Xbox 360 required a monthly subscription for its online service, and the backwards compatibility was only with 1 generation of consoles. For many people out there, including myself, these features made it seem worth it to get the PlayStation 3, especially considering the trust Sony established with its consumers from the success of the PlayStation 2, but this press conference can be seen as the shift in public perception towards the company. The PlayStation 3 had a rocky start. While the yellow light of death was not nearly as frequent of an issue as Xbox's Red Ring, Sony had an incredibly hard time building up a game library. Developers constantly complained of issues they faced when creating ports for the PS3, and they would often release games significantly earlier on the Xbox 360. This heavily impacted the overall sales of the console, because a lot of consumers opted for the Xbox 360 knowing the games would likely release a lot sooner, and the 360 ports were well known to have less bugs. After selling millions of units and finally starting to establish a decent game library, Sony would once again show their greed by slowly taking away those key selling points they used to initially sell the console at its steep price. The next revision of the PS3 would see no backwards compatibility with PlayStation 2 titles, and during During the console's life cycle, we would see the introduction of PlayStation Plus, a subscription-based online service. Sony was quick to contradict the very things that made their console appealing, taking advantage of consumers in the pursuit of profits. Luckily for Sony, they were basically gifted success during the next generation. During this 8th generation of gaming consoles, the roles were suddenly reversed, and Sony found themselves in the position of power. They released the PlayStation 4 for only $399 USD, undercutting Microsoft's Xbox One by $100. On top of this, the issues that plagued developers during the PS3 era seemed to be worked out, as the library of games on the PS4 ended up being one of the best we've ever seen, unlike the Xbox One, which really lacked any console-defining games. In all fairness, Sony didn't face much competition during this era due to the previously mentioned weak game library on the Xbox One, and Nintendo releasing one of their worst-selling consoles ever called the Wii U. However, Sony clearly really did try to redeem themselves in the eyes of the public here. Titles like Bloodborne, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Persona 5, God of War 2018, Marvel's Spider-Man, and so many more make this console up there with the PlayStation 2 in the eyes of many consumers. By this point, the subscription-based online service became a standard among companies too, so people were no longer really mad at Sony for adding this in. The PlayStation 4 ended up selling well over 100 million units worldwide, and technically it's still available in retail stores today as of December 2023, making it a giant success for the company. The PlayStation 5 might have just been the most hyped up console of all time. With Sony still riding high from the success of the PlayStation 4, the minor blemish of the PS3 in the company's long history was easy for a lot of people to forget about. In fact, I bought into the hype. The PlayStation 5 was the first gaming console that I ever pre-ordered, and I was very glad I did this after witnessing the massive production issues that led to this console being almost impossible to get your hands on early in its life. When this console hit the market, units were selling at over double their MSRP due to scalpers buying up the few available units. Now, this really wasn't Sony's fault. They were trying their best to produce as many units as possible. However, production issues stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic led to massive supply chain issues in the tech world. Sony couldn't possibly keep up with the demand, as the PS5 was hailed as the next big thing in gaming. Upon release, the PlayStation 5 seemed to have a great starting lineup of games. Demon's Souls and Spider-Man Miles Morales were the ones that really stood out to me. Unfortunately, due to the amount of time and effort that goes into making a modern video game, the next 2 years were very lackluster for game releases. But at the end of 2022, it seemed that Sony was finally able to both start meeting the production demands for the console and establish a strong lineup of games for 2023. The future was looking brighter than ever for Sony, but the company was quick to once again ruin this. In May of 2023, Sony announced their return to handheld gaming with the PlayStation Portal. Now, in this video, we didn't really mention any of Sony's previous attempts at handheld gaming, so let me get you up to speed. Before the PlayStation Portal, Sony had released 2 dedicated handheld consoles, the PlayStation Portable, or PSP, in 2005, and the PlayStation Vita in 2012. In my opinion, these consoles were both fantastic and paved the way for consoles like the Nintendo Switch, showing what was possible with handheld gaming. I mean, come on, playing a full God of War game handheld in the early 2000s is crazy. While Sony didn't necessarily do anything wrong with these 2 devices, both of them, especially the Vita, underperformed in terms of sales, leading to Sony exiting the handheld market up until the previously mentioned PlayStation Portal. Now, I have a whole video talking about the many problems I have with the PlayStation Portal, but to summarize it, it's not actually a gaming console. It's a streaming device that requires you to own a PS5 and have it turned on and connected to your home Wi-Fi in order to play. None of those previously purchased PS5 accessories, such as your Pulse 3D headset, are compatible with this device. If you wish to use headphones, you'll have to purchase Sony's Pulse Explorer headphones for an additional $100, or plug in headphones to the 3.5mm jack, which really no one uses these days. The controllers are not detachable, meaning when they inevitably break, you will be required to purchase a whole new PlayStation Portal device. Well, I've heard the argument that this is Sony attempting to be innovative. There is already a device that essentially does the exact same thing as the PlayStation Portal, and it's called the Backbone controller. This device came out all the way back in October of 2020. And the reason you may not have heard about it is no one really likes streaming when it comes to gaming. The reality is, the PlayStation Portal was just an attempt at a quick cash grab and will surely be remembered as another blemish in Sony's long legacy. Sony has never really been afraid to blatantly say they don't care about what the consumers actually want. A great example of this is Sony's former CEO Jim Ryan stating, "Why would anyone play this?" when discussing retro games and the lack of backwards compatibility on what was the latest Sony console at the time. At this point, we can easily determine that consumers want the option to play their older games on modern consoles, but making this feature available is not super profitable for companies like Sony, as they can't expect to sell retro games at the same price they sell modern games for, and they can't stuff them full of microtransactions. On the other hand, Microsoft was able to fully capitalize and prioritize backwards compatibility, and that's really one of the main reasons my preference has started shifting towards Xbox in recent years. Backwards compatibility aside, 2023 is where Sony really started to ruin their reputation in my opinion. The PlayStation Portal was the first of many failures as a company. In December of 2023, Sony announced that they will be deleting tons of purchase content that consumers have already paid for, and this was all due to licensing issues. This is pretty atrocious behavior, and in my opinion, it is clear theft. However, when purchasing digital media, no one really reads the fine print where it states that Sony has the right to do something like this. I believe the biggest problem is not actually the removal of this media. Yes, that is a big issue, and it proves that all of the people out there fighting for the continued existence of physical media are correct. However, in my opinion, the bigger issue is the fact that Sony thought it would be okay to do this and not offer compensation for the people who potentially lost thousands of dollars worth of content on their devices. The reality is, most people haven't purchased this type of content and won't be affected by this decision. However, some people out there will be heavily impacted, and this opens the door for Sony to do this with other types of content in the future. 10 years from now, will Sony remove already paid for games like Call of Duty and Diablo from your console due to licensing issues with those? Probably not, but we now know that it is possible. If Sony took the high road and chose to either renew their license or refund all of the customers who purchased this digital media that was deleted, I probably wouldn't even be making this video right now, but it is absolutely inexcusable when a company that is worth billions of dollars blatantly steals from the customers that they rely on to survive. The nail in the coffin for me is the latest Sony controversy regarding ownership of not digital but physical media. Now, in Sony's terms of service, specifically in Europe, there is a small section that states it is illegal to resell your physical PS5 games. This is something that has been in their terms for over 10 years and has been periodically updated to include the latest consoles. Apparently 10 years ago, when these terms of service first came to light, a well-known Sony personality made a tweet stating that despite what the terms of service say, you are allowed to resell your physical games. And to that, my question is, why is it so clearly stated that it is illegal to do so in your terms of service? My honest belief is that Sony would happily take away your right to resell purchased physical games if there was a way of enforcing it. However, currently there is no way to really do that, but in the future it might be much easier for companies to enforce a policy like this, with things such as digital tags attached to your physical purchases. I think that if Sony didn't have the intention to potentially one day enforce this type of rule, they would obviously not have it in their terms of service in the first place. And given what we saw the company do with digital purchases a few weeks prior, I have no doubt in my mind that they would happily take away your right to ownership if it meant that they could get more sales out of it. Sony has proven time and time again to be the greediest of the gaming companies, and given some of the nonsense that Nintendo pulls, this is actually quite an accomplishment for them. From someone who was once a massive fan of the PlayStation, I can confidently say that the only thing keeping me around is exclusive titles like the Final Fantasy VII trilogy. If those exclusive titles didn't exist, I would no longer be a PlayStation consumer. While it is uncertain what the future of gaming holds, I truly believe that Sony's shady practices will one day lead to their downfall. If you made it to the end of this video, I want to say thank you so much for watching. And if you are a big fan of Sony, I didn't mean to offend you personally, though I do feel like they deserve as many videos like this as possible, calling them out for their non-consumer friendly practices. The truth is, I'm sure with enough research, it would be easy to find similar shady business tactics from Nintendo and Microsoft, though right now the heat is on Sony because of that whole issue with stealing your digital purchases. The point is, most large corporations only care about your money, not your enjoyment enjoyment or well-being as a consumer. So I want to know, do you share some of the same opinions on Sony given their recent behavior? And what do you think this means for the future of media ownership? I try to read and respond to all of the comments, so let me know down below. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel as we are getting really close to that 1K mark. As always, take care guys, happy holidays, and I hope to see you in the next one.